Please can you remind me, if you'll be so kind, staring out into space, asking God to hear my case, trying to think of all things past. How long will my memory last? The purple angel, purple angel, purple angel, you're next to me.
Well, hi everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer's Speaks Radio. I'm your host and founder of Alzheimer's Speaks, Lori LeBay, and today we are thrilled to have our guest with us, who is Jackie Garrick, and she is going to be talking about some really interesting things, and I'm not going to drop the egg on that one quite yet. I'm going to go through our kind of normal introduction, and because we're always getting new listeners, and so for those of you that are new to Alzheimer's Speaks Radio, basically this was created due to my mom's journey with dementia for 30 years. And her journey was life-changing for me. And now we have Alzheimer's Speaks on many different platforms, from the blog to the resource directory to the YouTube, to doing dementia chats where I interview people with dementia, as well as hosting the radio show. And here we interview people at all different levels. So we have professionals. Our last show we just interviewed Dr. Elliot Goldstein with Promise Neurosciences, and he's a researcher. We have had authors on, we have had movie directors, singer-songwriters, different types of businesses providing services, products, and tools to help those dealing with dementia be able to live a little better life through having conversations. We've had family members and, again, the true experts, those that are diagnosed. Our company is what I consider an advocacy-based company, and our goal is to continue to provide multiple types of platforms for people to engage and share the knowledge that they have, so that they can help the next guy deal on their path just a little bit easier. So it's all about shifting our dementia care culture from crisis to comfort around the world. And it's fun using social media on this platform because we truly can make a difference globally by just having simple everyday conversations. So I thank you for participating in that. We also help companies expand kind of their brand footprint by leveraging our content too. So if you are a business who is in this arena and is looking to expand your audience, please reach out to me, because we have lots of different ways that we can assist you with that. You see, it's all your likes, your clicks, your shares that have really expanded our base. I've just been overwhelmed with the response of our various content. Because of you, we were recognized by Oprah as a health hero for 2018 in 2017 by Maria Shriver as an architect of change, and then in I think it was 2012, Dr. Oz and ShareCare recognized us as the #1 influencer online for Alzheimer's. And we did not do that ourselves by any stretch. That really was a collaborative effort of sharing knowledge, because we haven't bought any likes, any clicks, any shares. We just don't have it in the budget. Alzheimer's Speaks is pretty much this girl, on a mission to talk with others. And so again, really appreciate you in sharing our content, because that was the goal, when we started the company, was to get people engaged and to raise everyone's voice. So thank you for joining our mission, and any accolades that we get, we share them with you, because we truly do believe we are a team. I also need to give a shout out just to Health First. I was down in Melbourne, Florida last month, and they just had a great family caregiver conference that I was part of, and I was just really impressed with their company. I also just came back from Northwest Rural Health Conference in Washington, and that was really exciting to see what rural communities are doing to become more dementia friendly. I did a whole day intensive with that, and it was really fun to see what they were coming up with. In April, on the 10th, actually, I'm going to be in Iowa for the Alzheimer's Association's Brain Work Conference. And I'm really excited to go there. One, just to meet everybody. That's always fun. So if you're in that area, please come and say hi to me. I'd love to talk with you and learn more about your journey. But I'm going to get to meet former governor of Wisconsin, Martin Schreiber, which is exciting because I had him actually on the radio show. His wife was diagnosed with dementia. He wrote a book called My Two Elaines. And he'll be talking about what he learned in terms of coping through that process. And so that will be fun in and of itself. And it sounds like Jackie's got some guests in the house there. So what are the dogs' names, Jackie?
That would not go off while we were.
Well, some days we just don't have control over those things. And what I love about my audience dealing with dementia, they really know that is a very minute little thing. It doesn't really matter. And they tell me that all the time. Like, if we have a computer glitch or, a call gets dropped, they're like, that's nothing compared to the world they're living in. And so they are very forgiving and accepting and just continue on with a smile on their face. So don't let that stress you out, because it's not going to stress us out. Jackie, for those of you that don't know her, is a former Army social worker, and she's also worked in the VA, the Congress, and the Pentagon. And she specializes in military-related disability benefits and PTSD, which we're hearing more and more about all the time, suicide prevention, and now you have started a whistleblower company for peer support called Whistleblowers of America. And then you also do consulting through FAR Group Consulting. And so I'm really excited to have you with us today. I was able to hear her speak for one of the NFL Super Bowl events. And I thought I have to have her on the show. She's just got such a wide range of knowledge, and speaks on topics that, sometimes are kind of uncomfortable for us to hear and to have, but they are essential for us to talk about. And, that's one of the things that we do here is try to ease that distress in conversations that are so relevant. So thank you for joining us today, Jack. Prior to starting today, we were kind of joking that her dogs couldn't be outside because of the rain, and I'm in Minnesota, and we're getting, here it is April, and we're getting 6 inches of snow, and they're going to close the schools early this afternoon. So with that, I never know what my internet connection is going to be like, but we had our fingers crossed, and I'm sure it'll all be just fine. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is if you can explain to our audience what the connection between the biological brain function and mental health is.
There are some interesting theories in terms of looking at the cortisol levels that get produced by the hormones that we have that are involved in our fight-flight system.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when we start talking about trauma and traumatic stress and the amount of endorphins and dopamine and cortisol and all of the chemicals that affect the brain, how does that change the brain and change the actual construct of the brain over time? And there is definitely more of a body of research that indicates that our brains change based on that exposure to stress, and that those toxic environments have long-lasting impacts as well.
Which makes a lot of sense. And I think, but I also think it's one of those areas that's ignored. We try to pretend like we're dealing with it, and we're not fully viewing ourselves in the mirror in terms of how are we truly reacting to it, and what is it doing to not only our mind, but our body as a whole. And it's a dangerous thing to ignore, that stress.
So I think, and you made reference in your introduction to the brain forum that we just had in Minnesota in relation to the Super Bowl. And prior to the actual game, Lee Steinberg hosts a huge party, and part of that is he invites people to come to this brain forum. And we were able to discuss the fact that military service and sports have, in this case, on women. And one of the things, and Gus Farrat, who was a football player, as many of you may or may not know, but Gus Farrat made a really good observation in talking about when we go to the doctor, we get our blood tested, we get our urine tested, we get a screening, which is pretty much from the neck down, not the neck up. And we don't get, and there aren't that many for actually screening our brain health. And that's an important piece because we miss so much of the actual brain functioning as well as the emotional functioning when, our primary care doctors don't assess our cognitive abilities and where we're at emotionally.
Very true. And I'm just going to give a plug for Gus because he is working with a company that has an app called the Roberto App, which measures brain function through video engagement. And it's fun, it's easy, it's not very expensive, but it gives you a great baseline if you just want to track yourself. That panel was very informative. And
I think we're very interested in some of these tools and looking at how the active duty military and veterans, wounded warriors, disabled vets, how they could benefit from having some of these technologies that monitor brain functioning and help inform treatment, compliance with treatment, and self-monitoring so that you can feel more resilient, more able to function and do things on your own, as opposed to having to solely rely just on your caregiver to remember when to take your meds or to be able to monitor your performance in terms of, like for the wounded warriors who are competing and they're trying to keep track of their biological, physiological reactions, their speed, their time. So, and to be at appointments and to be on time for races. So all these things that happen, with scheduling are important tools as well that facilitate this brain health.
Exactly. It's something we all need to be much more conscious of at all ages because, with dementia, it's not an old person's disease. Kids are now getting diagnosed with this, the concussions and the traumatic brain injuries that are happening from car accidents, from supporting our country, in the military. I mean, there's so many avenues. We really all have to get better educated. Us as civilians, as those in the military, and our medical professionals too need a lot more training out there in terms of what to look for and what resources supportive for people too.
To make a distinction between the cognitive and the brain functioning and some of the psychiatric mental health conditions as well, because those things happen sometimes on a similar trajectory, but also on a separate trajectory. And we have to be able to understand the difference between a traumatic brain injury, TBI or CTE, it's been more common among the football players. What are the differences between a blast and a concussion from a roadside bomb as opposed to the constant having your head hit during a football game, as well as then the emotional consequences if you've been exposed to combat or other types of trauma with a sexual assault. In the world I'm working with now, it's retaliation, hostile work environments. Those are traumatic experiences that when repeatedly there's this exposure to the trauma or there's memories of death, destruction, you're having nightmares, you're hypervigilant. Those things are on the psychiatric side. And we need to be able to treat those symptoms. But if we're not looking at the comorbid conditions when a TBI and PTSD happen together, and you're treating the PTSD with cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a cognitive-based approach. If you're working with somebody who might not be able to engage in that cognitive reprocessing, well, then the therapy might not work. And what I've seen for generations with Vietnam veterans is that they were labeled treatment failures or non-compliant. And so instead of looking at the treatment maybe not being right for the veteran, we've looked at the veteran as not being right for the treatment. And I think we have seen in this OIF, Iraqi freedom, Afghanistan, in this current generation, we're learning a lot about brain injury that I don't think we looked at in the Vietnam era or even before that, Korea, World War II. We didn't quite understand the brain injury in the same way. So now we have this aging Vietnam veteran population who has had PTSD for decades, and we've not looked at the types of treatment we've offered. And the VA offers, as evidence-based, primarily two types of treatment, both cognitively based treatments, when in fact they might be having to deal with a population that they've never really diagnosed and properly assessed for their brain injuries. And I think that's been a big missing piece for this generation, because now we also see a high rate of suicide among or an older population in general. And I think we've misdiagnosed some of their head injury or that complication maybe from a head injury earlier in life that's now affecting their mood, whether they're depressed, anxious. And we do see in a Vietnam population or other aging combat veteran population with World War II near the end of their lives, decompensated quicker and faster than maybe their peers, because the ability to control the traumatic stress reaction. You have a veteran who has now early onset of dementia, and previously they never had PTSD symptoms. You might see a triggering because their ability to control some of their beliefs, some of those memories had, are now surfaced. It's a re-traumatization. They've lost their job, they've lost their identity.
Well, that is really interesting. And like you said, something that hasn't really been talked about widely in terms of what is going on. And so many people are affected, by the wars that we've been in, and the service that is held. And that's a whole nother level of insight for people to be able to understand. I remember in this, my mom didn't serve, but in her dementia, and I'll never forget this moment. We were cleaning out her closet in the nursing home, and I was just going to organize it. I wasn't really getting rid of anything. I was just going to straighten it up so it'd be a little easier for her. And she just got hysterical. She was sobbing and she was just terrified. And I'm like, Mom, I'm organizing. I'm not going to throw anything out. Don't worry. You still have all your faves and stuff. And then come to realize that the TV was on and we were bombing Iraq. And in her mind, that was happening right out the door. It wasn't overseas. It wasn't on TV. It was right there. And that was just such a huge revelation to me in terms of a trigger point. And I can't even imagine if, let's say, she had dementia and she did serve, what that would have triggered in her. My mom wasn't in the service, never was in the service. And it just triggered it was terrifying, just terrifying. But as soon as I turned that TV off, she reacclimated. But again, those are things that we don't really think about, and they're critical in terms of the person's peace of mind and feeling of safety. And of course, we've got to be much more conscious with that. Have you seen more progression in terms of doctors or therapies in terms of their approach?
The way they're able to treat veterans is very much based on what's evidence-based or what there's proof of as having worked, and less ability to embrace some of the more ancillary types of services and support. Although I have to say over the last few years, I think there's been more of that, and adding in some of the other types of therapies, like being able to add in music therapy with the population. Because sometimes I've seen this with art therapy, where somebody who might not be able to put into words what their trauma is, it's really healing. So we've done, like with Wounded Warriors, they've made masks. I've seen collages where you can cut out pictures from magazines and create your own narrative. And you don't have to be a great artist.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen with some of the adaptive sports how that really has helped younger Wounded Warriors with rebuilding their sense of self, of confidence, of their self-actualization skills, and being part of a team. I am a real believer that peers and peer support, somebody can connect with who understands their experience, mitigate a like you were talking about, a negative reaction. To have that capability is really powerful. And I think those are the kinds of tools outside of, and by all means, I'm a fan of cognitive behavior therapy. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but by all means, those ancillary approaches I think are very helpful and useful in building a person's everyday life capabilities, not just their therapeutic ones.
Yeah. One of the things, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's called Dementia Mentors. And it's a group of individuals that, let's say you would get diagnosed with a form of dementia. You could contact them and they will hook you up with a mentor, someone who is diagnosed, who's heard those words, who's seen their family and friends' reactions, who's lived it. And people just say over and over what a lifesaver that is, because it's real life, it's common sense connection. And sometimes I think sometimes we can forget how important both of those things are. Everything can't have the stats behind it unless it's tried first, and it's just that social connection, I think, is just so powerful for people not to feel alone and not to feel isolated. And they do it, most of them do it through a Zoom platform like this. So they're doing a video conferencing maybe once or a couple times a week, some maybe only once a month, depending on what the needs are, of the individuals, but getting them reconnected and kind of restabilized where everything is safe. And they just have these earnest conversations that we don't always have every day. We still have a lot of filters and we cover up and they just let it all out and say it's okay.
We're also dealing maybe with a more recent life diagnosis, but you're also dealing with the ghosts of the past, and you're trying to still continue to process traumatic events that, although may have happened 20 years ago, 40 years ago, those are still very powerful memories that are embedded in your ability to respond to current life events. So trauma survivors have a very hypervigilant approach to social situations. They're always on guard. They're always waiting for, what could happen. Don't like to have their back to the door. That those issues don't go away. One diagnosis doesn't override or replace another one.
Yeah.
You still have to be able to integrate trauma care, PTSD trauma type care into a more current, especially if, as we're talking about elderly and as people age and the diseases related to aging, how do some of those things from the military, war-related experiences, other types of traumas, how do they continue to play out in current everyday life? And how do you talk about those things who, especially with Agent Orange related diseases, are also going to have an impact as they age? They're still not 100% involved the effects that have had on the body, and how the brain is impacted by some of those things are important for, I think you asked earlier about like what do medical providers need to know. I think being able to do that, military history, knowing about where somebody served, knowing what their exposures were, knowing what their combat experiences were, knowing if they've ever been in PTSD treatment, if they've ever been suicidal, taking medication that could have long-lasting effects as well. The veteran has been through combat or other military-related trauma.
Yeah, I had a friend who wrote a book about her dad who had post-traumatic stress, wanted to apply for help, but back then they were really discouraged against getting it. And yeah, it's a really interesting book, and the family dynamics and the alcoholism that then came to be the addiction because he was trying to deal with it himself, and how that affected the family. And it was just an amazing story, the research that she did on this. And it makes me think of, there's a lot of memory units that will have displays, of different things for service, but people also have to understand the flip side. Just like with music can do great things, but it can also, it can trigger fond memories and happiness and joy, but it can also trigger great sadness and grief and different things. And memorabilia regarding, service can do the same thing too. And I have to honestly say, I have not really heard any prime discussions regarding kind of that give and take, of that effect. And I think it's really important. And I love your idea about diving deeper into that experience. And, I think everybody in the dementia arena, most people understand it's important to get that history, but I think sometimes we're too superficial with it. Oh, they were a vet. Well, you need to know more than just they were a vet. And you gave some great examples of, conversations that could be had that, for a lot of reasons were probably too uncomfortable for many people to even discuss. Think of our Vietnam vets and how they were treated when they came home. That still just breaks my heart. Yeah, there's a lot that needs to be discussed.
Some of these are taboo subjects. They are difficult to talk about. Trauma is definitely difficult to talk about. But one of the things really helpful healing is how we manage the narrative. And ownership of your own narrative while you still can, I think is particularly important. And so one of the things I really like are, I'll call them legacy projects, where families can get together and help really rebuild the narrative. The Library of Congress does a really interesting Veterans History project. The Women in Military Service Memorial has a Women in Military opportunity to share your narrative. There are these opportunities out there where you can actually have these guided conversations about military experience. But I think in all, families can really pull together their own, whether it's like a scrapbook or a memory box, where you can collect and identify things that were important, put together a uniform, put together a album of photographs, all of that paperwork, which is important on many levels because you might need them for benefits, things like that with the Departments of Veterans Affairs and Defense, sometimes your state benefits. I mean, there's a whole lot of other reasons for keeping the paperwork and organizing the paperwork that comes from the military. But being able to have that family narrative, knowing the difference between the branches of the service and, like, for example, with the Army, what's the difference between an artillery unit, an infantry unit, being a medic versus being a corpsman from the Navy, being aboard a ship, as opposed to being a Marine with, that boots on the ground grunt experience. for families to know that narrative is an important part of the family history, and being able to build that together, to have parents and children and grandchildren and aunts, uncles, and cousins work on this family military narrative, I think is a great way of preserving the family legacy, but also having all of the records and the documentation together that you might need in the event of needing to get VA care benefits, burial benefits, whether somebody's entitled to a flag, is entitled to, and how to properly honor a military veteran when they have passed.
One thing I have to, and I've said this before on a couple other shows, but every time I get the opportunity, I say it. My dad served in the Army. When we went to bury him, talked at the funeral, and they said, well, we'll give you a flag. And I'm like, well, there's three of us. We need three flags, And he's like, well, I can only give you one, but you can buy two more. And so we bought two more so that each of us could have that piece of my dad, so that we didn't, because that was really going to be a tug of war amongst us. So that was just such an important symbol to us. And so I always share that with other families. You don't have to struggle with that. You can go and purchase more so that you have that symbolic piece, for each of you. And for us as siblings, that was just such a gift for each of us to have. It was just such an honor to be able to have that. The only mistake that was made was at the funeral, they put out all three flags. And then their friend said, well, did he serve in more than one, one capacity? Was he in more than one war? What was the deal? And then we got a good laugh out of it and said, no, he was just didn't, serve the one time and stuff, but then explained what we were doing. And then people really liked that idea as family. And so I always try to talk about that anytime that I can.
Sort of create traditions, especially as we move into more of a conversation about grief and loss. And trauma for the veterans themselves is, how do you create that sense of commemoration important to the veteran? I'm in the Washington, D.C. area, so people like to come here and visit the Vietnam Veteran Memorial, the World War II Memorial, the Korean War Memorial. I mean, that's all right here and very accessible. Every state has some type of a memorial now for veterans. Going to visit that memorial, or is bringing something into the house like a folded flag or displaying medals. Those all become ways of honoring and recognizing service. And one of the things they do now with this younger generation is they celebrate their Alive Day. So if they were wounded in combat or had some injury and they have come past that, they call that day their Alive Day. So they have their birthday, but they celebrate the day they were born. But then they have this Alive Day that's very much about a renewal and a recommitment to life, and recognizing that there was a really bad day in my life, and I've had to come this far in my recovery, and recovering from some of these very painful wounds. And we've talked a little bit about the traumatic brain injury, but we have generations now of veterans who have survived amputations, multiple body system injuries. So maybe you can't see all the scars, but there are a lot of scars there. And how do you talk about the scars, the emotional ones as well as the physical ones, with your family? How do you explain the scars to your children, to your grandchildren, who want to understand, why is mom or dad or pop, why are they different, or why do they look different? Or, if I'm there, am I going to get that scar? Is that going to happen to me? Children don't understand those kinds of things. Talking about it so that it can become sort of a source of pride for families, because they need to understand what has happened to know how to, especially children, to know how to integrate it into their own narrative about who they are in the world as well.
Very true. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, as people age, do you feel like there's more of a risk for suicide than there used to be?
See suicide kind of along what I call an inverted bell curve. So you see a very high rate at the younger ages, and then sort of as you get towards your middle ages, it goes down. And I think as people are, they're busy with life, they've kind of adjusted to who they are, but then it starts to go back up as people age, as they pass their 60s, 70s, even into their 80s. We see an increase in suicide rate. Veterans are very familiar with the use of firearms. So when you have a population that knows how to use a firearm, firearms are the most lethal means of suicide.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a population that's familiar with a very lethal means, that you see a much higher rate of suicide among those populations who use a more lethal means, as well as in populations that tend to be isolated. So when you think about some of the rural communities, like very rural Minnesota had a high suicide rate among its National Guard and really stepped up and did a lot to address it. And now Minnesota's on a lower end of the suicide spectrum. Farming community, a very small town, and access to care is 100 miles away, and it's hard to get treatment. Facilities don't exist. There's a shortage of medical providers. Those are some other factors that impact a suicide rate. Care, where it is available, where people get treatment. We know treatment works. We know that you can overcome feeling suicidal, and that you can find your new normal. You can reinvent your life.
Well, and a lot of times with dementia too, they revert back in time, so they may have dealt with it, and now we're pushing them back into it. And that can happen subtly, or it could be triggered instantly. I mean, so many different routes there, but we have to be conscious of that. And apparently the dogs are agreeing with my comment.
Yes, I've heard your snowplow, and now I hear my dogs.
Yeah, some things we can't control, so,
They're elderly dogs, so their triggers and their responses, they can't see, they can't hear, they can't get up. So all they have left is their ability to bark. So I think there's an aging message in there too for our pets.
Yep, exactly.
Since they're insisting.
Do you have some suggestions of what our audience can do to help support vets as they age?
So I think the ability to be a caregiver for especially a disabled aging veteran is to be very mindful of their need for their independence, as I'm sure with anybody else, but to also recognize the importance of that military experience, to know what might be a unique factor like exposure to Agent Orange, know what a lifelong PTSD could be all about, and then what means of support are there. The veteran service organizations are available. They have all kinds of programs. It's not just being solely reliant on the VA and those medical centers, but there's a whole bunch of other community activities. There's the National Resource Directory, is a website that you can look up by your area what's available. There are something like 60,000 nonprofits that want to help the military. There are some very local community-based programs. Easter Seals has programs. So just knowing that there are some things very specific and very targeted for veterans, and to look for that, I think is important, is just to be able to properly search for that kind of information.
Okay. And then do you want to talk a little bit about your Whistleblower of America organization too?
Sure. So Whistleblowers of America, we started that as a peer support program for people who have identified wrongdoing in relation to waste, fraud, and abuse in the government, the private sector. We have veterans who have been denied access to care. We've dealt with privacy violations in relation to your medical record, and medical errors, and the types of things the VA employees have tried to report to make things better for veterans. So what we try to do is provide them with peer support. We're non-legal, non-medical. We work from a strategic planning perspective, like what do you need to do for you? What does right look like? What are your options? What systems are in place to help you with your case if you're going to pursue a case? And then how do you get through that? What makes you resilient? And again, using a lot about what I know from the military community in overcoming the traumatic stress. And I consider whistleblower retaliation as something we should look at like we do other types of traumas, like we look at religious persecution. Retaliation might not necessarily result in a physical death, although in some cases look like suicide, and medical errors, there may have been patient deaths. But overall, what happens to you and the impact on your life, people have called it career suicide. So you lose a lot of yourself when you become a whistleblower, because you lose your professional reputation, your character is assassinated, cyberbullied by people who don't even know you. If your case becomes public, now all of a sudden people who have never met you have an opinion about you, and they're sharing it on Facebook. So that can be very stressful for people. And it all started because you thought you were doing the right thing, and it has gone very awry. And I've talked to people who stood up for other people. They've reported discrimination based on race, gender, sexual harassment, bullying, all kinds of what I call the toxic tactics of the workplace. So, and we talk about it in terms of gaslighting, mobbing, devaluing, marginalizing, shunning, blackballing, double binding, and then the accusing, and in some cases the emotional and physical violence that gets perpetrated against whistleblowers.
Yeah, well, and we're seeing so many of those coming forward now from, even just the kids in the Parkland shooting incident being attacked, or, women from the Me Too. And we're just seeing a lot more people coming forward, but with that, seeing just the ridiculous attacks on some of these people too, and just the anger and the vindictiveness and to do anything to get them to shut up and go away, and realizing the strength of these people who are just trying to make our world a better place. Really admirable, to put yourself in that position, because it's not an easy road to hoe.
Whistleblowers have a First Amendment right to speak out. Now, you don't have to like everything they say, you don't have to agree with everything they say, but they have a certain amount of a right, like everybody else, to speak out. And most whistleblowers are speaking out in the face of some kind of wrongdoing. Speaking out because they're trying to be contrary or difficult. They're trying to right a wrong. I mean, that's always an element of being a whistleblower, that they're not trying to be troublemakers. And we do need to change the conversation. Even if you do a Microsoft search on whistleblower, it'll give you all these negative words: mole, snitch, tattletale. It doesn't give you first relator, protector, truth teller. And we need to shift our thinking about whistleblowers to a more positive image and role. And instead of embedding them in this adversarial human resources process, we should really be including whistleblowers in organizational development, process improvement, quality management, right? All those different types of approaches. We don't do the root cause analyses like the joint. So that's why I'm excited about getting to do this, taking on sort of this new population and really trying to change the dynamic about this.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I know myself, even just when I switched and got into the dementia space, I wasn't viewed as a whistleblower, but I was viewed as very different in terms of my approach. And some people really embraced it, and some people really tried to squelch it and disapprove of it. But, for me, the only way I could come into this space is how I viewed it was I couldn't work in a broken system. I needed to try to, and I knew it wasn't going to be perfect, but I needed to at least try to provide something different. And, for me, it's been almost 10 years in this space, and I still feel some of that at times. So it's gotten, I think I'm much more accepted now, and, have gotten some recognitions that have really helped. But it's a tough battle, and emotionally it can just drain you at times where you're just like, I give up, it's too much. I don't want to do this. And again, I wasn't a full whistleblower per se, but just, when we take a different approach, there are going to be those skeptics and those that want to squelch you. And you have to just stay really strong in terms of why are you approaching this to begin with? And if you always go back to that why, it's for the greater good. And I don't think you can go wrong if that is truly your focus, if it really is to improve things. It might take longer than what we like, and there might be some people who will never ever accept what it is you have to say, but those people existed before you got into this space too, and so it's a matter of learning how to move forward and align with those who get you, because I know, for me, sometimes I just have to give up on trying to convince somebody else that there's another way, because they're draining too much of my energy. And if I can get to other people and get them on board, then we have more voices going, and it makes life a little bit easier. But trying to figure that balance out, especially in the beginning, is really hard, because you just want everyone to get it. You want everyone, to get on board. And granted, that's the goal, but know that chances are you're not going to get that 100%.
Certainly, if we're advocates and we're trying to make a condition better, then I think that we all come to the table for the right reason, and it's being able to be seen as coming to the table for the right reason. I mean, I had somebody say to me when I first said, I'm working with whistleblowers on this project right now, and she said, that makes me bristle. And I said, no, don't bristle. Whistleblowers are a good thing. They're there to help you. And I had to really talk her through the organizational development, employee engagement, managing change, continuous process improvement, and when you start to reframe it and you start to think about it in managing change and improving systems and improving structures and adding a voice and pulling together maybe disparate thoughts. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is with communities and with organizations is to map. We all know our inner circle, right? We all know, when you're talking about, let's say, dementia, you can be looking at the individual who was diagnosed and the family, and then the extended family, and the church or the employer, and you can start to figure out those are the pieces that are around that person. But what about some of the non-traditional? Who else can you bring to the table? Who else might have skin in the game? And what about the local recreation center, or the health club, or the library, or an art project devoted to living with dementia, or asking the bank to host an art project devoted to dementia, or the financial management issues involved in the social world.
And it just makes it easier too. And you get resources that you didn't even know you needed, or that you had access to. And a lot of times they're free. People will just bring them to the table because they have access to them and they believe. But I think that's, what you're talking about is that passion and that purpose to improve. It's not, so many times it gets framed as good or bad. and it's not, we have to stop looking at things as a win or lose, and we have to start looking at it as progress to improve. And failure is just a tool. And when we should be patting people on the backs for recognizing failure and coming up with other ways. That should be a huge, thank God we have these people, because it really is about the greater good. It is about moving forward. It's not, when I used to be a supervisor in healthcare, I would always say, the door is open, you can always come in and talk to me. But, it's not just about talking and letting people vent. It's getting them vested in change. And when they can bring ideas to the table, and not that everything's going to be implemented, but when they feel their voice is heard, you're going to make change in a better fashion and on a faster platform in a way than you ever imagined, because you've got more buy-in. I mean, it's common sense to me, and I just kind of go, how did this get so twisted? Because to me, the way my brain works, it's like, how did we get these stigmas attached to certain things? Because they really have shut us down. And I think we're in an era now of trying to lift those myths and dispense of those. And people are just like, let's move forward. Let's make sense. Let's always try to improve. Let's stop thinking that we've got it perfect, because everything else around us is going to change, so we still have to be fluid. And I think we're coming to an era of more people wanting to be part of a fluid society, one that's always improving, one that it is okay to have an opinion, and it's okay to agree to disagree, at times, as long as it's in a respectful fashion. And be adults.
I was talking to a friend who's an audiologist now, and I don't always think about suicide and audiology, but she had attended this presentation on tinnitus, and the hearing aids.
Yep.
People that have had head trauma also have hearing loss or vision loss, and how do you bring those communities to the table? The audiologists have a role to play in mitigating suicide.
Yeah.
And I thought about the audiologists and suicide prevention if it hadn't been for her kind of sharing with me that she had just gone to this conference and there was this whole presentation. Those are the types of things that you have to be open and willing to think outside your box, so that you can hear what other people might bring to the table, and you might not think, oh, well, that's not really relevant, but then if you give it time and attention, you figure out maybe later on down the line, well, that was relevant, or this person who I didn't think could be a support for me actually might be a support, maybe not in this area, but they have this whole body of knowledge that that they're involved with, and maybe I could get involved with that too. And that would be, even if it's a release, right? I'm so focused on this, it might be good to get away from this and go look at that and get out of my norm and experience something different. Could be enlightening and help me deal with the stress of my everyday life too, to do something different. I'm not suggesting you have to go skydiving or bungee cord jumping, but you get out of your comfort level and you experience things with other people that you might not think of as part of your traditional social support network. And it does help to take that anxiety and maybe de-escalate a stressful situation, or just give you that break, that respite that you need from your own issues to kind of hear what somebody else is dealing with, and what are the solutions that they're using. Like we talked about earlier, why should a former Army officer spend time with former NFL players? Like, what do we have in common? And that shared learning was a great opportunity to hear about what they're doing for their community and how are they helping retired athletes deal with the physical and stressful. And then all of a sudden you find all these commonalities between football players and military veterans who have had, the loss of the team, the loss of the uniform, the helmet, the body armor, losing that whole identity, losing that uniform. That is stressful and overcoming. And what are the systems at play? And again, how do you take these non-traditional peers and match them up so that they can support each other? And there were programs that they were talking about, like at the Eisenhower Center, where they do match up and they do pair peers from these non-traditional environments. And you can train somebody to be a mentor. We often talk about, can a male be a good mentor for a female? Or can a female be a good mentor for a male coming up in a corporation? Are their challenges that much different that they couldn't mentor each other? And of course, that's not true. I mean, you can learn quite a bit. Some of my best mentors have been men. Mm-hmm. And I've tried to be a mentor to other females coming up behind me. And it doesn't, different races, different cultural backgrounds. You can bridge those gaps and help each other learn and grow without having to agree on every, point by point by point.
Yeah. Well, and if you're only going to mentor women and men are only going to mentor men, that just makes the divide stronger. And it's not looking at our commonalities, it's looking at our differences. And our differences divide us, and our commonalities build bonds and friendships and support. And, there's also this ability to learn, from others, that none of us has all the answers, that if we're honest, we all see and hear things differently. Though we all think everybody sees and hears things exactly the way we do, they don't. Because their history is different, their attitude is different, their perceptions are different. And, and that I think is part of being a strong leader, is to understand those differences, to expect those differences, to appreciate those differences, and use them to add to your arsenal of growth instead of trying to blow them up. Go, this is a gift, I can use this in other areas to look at things differently, to maybe be empathetic for someone else or show some compassion that I didn't realize that I was coming off like this. I thought I was a good person. I thought I was being respectful, and all of a sudden you're seeing, oh, maybe not so much, and having that ability to change. So I think I love the work that you're doing. It is so broad but so powerful and yet so specific, to raise people and to not make them feel isolated, and to truly understand who they are at their core, and to help them live the best lives. And with Whistleblowers is, they're trying to help people live the best life as well. And sometimes we have to expose some things that aren't working in order to correct them. There's no other way. It's not going to change if it's not exposed. And so that can be a treacherous spot to be, or if we get companies to really be progressive and say, thank you, you're right.
Thank you would be a long call from where we are now.
Yeah, but I mean, really, in terms of being so offended, they should be glad they have an opportunity to stop it and to change. But it's not looked as an opportunity to change. It's not, it's not referenced in that point. But, hopefully in the years to come, that will change, because the time wasted fighting this stuff, you're trying to deny what is happening, doesn't do anybody any good. And it makes those divides longer. And any company who has a service started a service because they felt there was a need. And a whistleblower is saying, either that got off whack or the needs have changed. I mean, it's really, to me, as simple as that. You know, either we missed the mark or we need change to continue to serve. But how do we do that? And
spot on.
yeah. So, well, Jackie, thank you so much for being with us today. Now, people can go to your website if they'd like to contact you on any of these topics. And your website is whistleblowersofamerica.org. Again, that's whistleblowersofamerica.org. And any last comments that you want to make to our audience?
No, I just want to thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. I've enjoyed having this discussion and opening up a whole nother level of interest in trauma and brain injury for another community. So, anytime, I'm happy to come back.
Okay, well, wonderful. I'm going to give a couple of shout outs just to a few organizations before we wrap up. I always like to give a shout out to Care to Plan, which is a new dementia resource directory that's in beta testing. You can go to alzheimersspeaks.com and go to our resource page. You can learn more about how to participate in that. But it's really powerful and very cool, and something I wanted 30 years ago, almost 35 years ago, when my mom first got diagnosed and was dealing with symptoms. And I think it's going to help out many people around the country. The Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation, if you're looking kind of for a holistic approach, they've got a really cool meditation program that has research behind it. And that might be something of value to your vets as well. Where you do some chanting and then you just do some finger movements, but there's some great statistics behind, kind of a refocus and finding that calmness. And then Maria Shriver has her Women's Alzheimer's Movement. She's going to be doing Move for the Minds again this year. And I believe, I still don't have all the details, because my computer crashed, so I'm running a little behind on getting caught up on things. But I think she is going to personally be at 4 different locations this year, and she's still partnering with Equinox fitness centers through the U.S. and I believe into Europe as well. And then if you're looking for a memory cafe, you can go to memorycafedirectory.com, which is sponsored by Calendar Cards. Both Calendar and Cards is spelled with a K, which is a memory system. And the last one I want to yell out, and this might be really good for your vets too, is the Purple Table Reservations. This is a gal whose mom had dementia, and so they started kind of having gatherings like a memory cafe in their restaurant out east. And she has now developed an app and a training for restaurants in terms of how to deal with people with dementia, but it will be larger than just dementia. It'll be for autism, post-traumatic stress, all kinds of things where it'll be very discreet, but people can call in and then get their reservation. So maybe they'll be seated in a quieter area with better lighting. The choices that the wait staff may give them are going to be fewer, so it's not as complicated. All of those types of things that can just make a dining experience a little bit easier. So I'm really excited about what they've pulled together. And the training is going to be very economical for the restaurant staff to have. And they've got a lot of people requesting this now. It's getting the restaurants on board to get them trained. So if anyone listening has a connection to a restaurant or maybe owns a chain, please go to purpletables.com to get more information on that. So with that, we will go ahead and call it a wrap. And thank you so much again, Jackie. And you can go to Jackie's site one more time, is whistleblowersofamerica.com. Thank you again. Bye now.
Please can you remind me if you're